Hello, party people, and welcome to Office Hours, the first office hours in my new home office in Las Vegas. Just moved to, yes, it's a better Friday already, yes, general concativity. Um, Yes, so just moved to Las Vegas, bought a house out in Las Vegas, and I'm setting up my home studio out here. I still have wire management, cable management to do clearly. I moved to a smaller desk too. I moved to a desk that's only like 4 feet wide because I wanted to have a whole lot more room in my office in order to set up things like cameras, get better distance from cameras, have a bookshelf in the background with all kinds of stuff on it that kind of represents me. I'll be fleshing some of that out over the course of the next couple of episodes, getting things all set up. And then also too, I've got a whole green screen, painted a green screen onto a wall here behind me, so that I can do nice, easy green screen, pretty large green screen work, and do a better job of dancing across the entire slide deck. Like that. The lighting's still a hot mess. I still have to figure out, I want to get balanced lighting, of course. And now it looks like I'm a little bit of a, zombie kind of lighting in here. I have lights up above me, but they cast a real weird color temperature, so I'm getting a different set of lights up here in this grandma looking ceiling fan. I'll be replacing that too as well over the next couple of episodes. But loving the new house so far. I have a 3-car garage now. Oh, Sequel Dev DBA, thanks for subscribing. Appreciate it. Very cool. For 6 months straight. That's very cool. But loving Las Vegas, loving having the space. So I moved into a big old 5-bedroom house. I say big old, it's like 20 years old. 5-bedroom house with a 3-car garage. I'm already wishing that I had a 4-car garage because I have 3 cars, but then of course you want other things, space inside the garage to do things like put your trash cans and all that. So enough about me. Let's go hit some of y'all's high-voted SQL Server questions. The first one, the top-voted one of the morning, says, from Jim D. Hi, Brent. I'm migrating an instance from SQL Server 2016 to 2019, including 3 very large databases. Is there much benefit in doing this with log shipping versus just restoring the full backup during the week and then a diff on the day of migration? So for me, it all comes down to how much downtime how much downtime the business is willing to accept. Log shipping helps you get very close to real time. Differential backups on a very large database might take a really long time, especially if you said you're doing weekly fulls and then daily diffs. Well, if the database is changing a lot through the week, the size of the differential backup will grow all week long. So you can get into a situation, especially I've seen it where people were doing index maintenance across their databases. We're doing index maintenance like every night, which essentially shuffles a bunch of pages around, which changes a bunch of 8K pages kind of unnecessarily in this situation, and then their database backup, the diffs, ended up being about the same size as the full backup. So if you insist on doing the differential approach, just make sure you're changing as little as possible during that week. You might want to disable your index rebuild jobs. And defrag jobs, same exact thing. Next up, we have Sev A. Sev A asks, what are the top misuses of SQL Server that you've seen from clients which are better accomplished using other software products? Oh, that's a good one. Oh, I kind of need to move this around so it doesn't beat the daylights out of the microphone, don't I? Let's see if we can move this. Well, I'll just take the top off the coffee cup for now. So number one by far is storing data that shouldn't be in a relational database. And the way that I like to say that is, if your query doesn't include a join, it probably shouldn't be in a relational database. After all, the reason that we call it a relational database is because tables have relationships to each other. And if you're not taking advantage of those kinds of query features, what's the point of putting it in a relational database? Relational databases are pretty much the most expensive place that you could put data almost anything else is cheaper. It would be cheaper to hire someone to etch your data onto stone tablets than it would be to use a relational database. And I'm not just talking about SQL Server, I'm talking about MySQL and Postgres too as well, open source ones, because it still takes database administrators to manage that stuff as you start to scale. Even if you say we use a database administrator free magical platform as a service database, those are super expensive too when you start to look at by the gigabyte type storage. So the biggest thing I can tell people is when they're hitting performance problems is we look at two things. What are the largest objects in your database, and what are the queries that you run most frequently? And I'll give you a great example from a client that I worked with recently where their databases were more than 10 terabytes in size. I don't want to get more specific than that, but they were much larger than 10 terabytes in size. And a couple of the largest objects, we're talking multiple terabytes worth of stuff, were error logs with big JSON objects. Hey, Surly Dev, good to see you, sir. Were JSON blobs that were just being stored anytime that their application had any kind of error. They were storing it inside a SQL server in a big old, just like error number 1, date time, big old JSON blob. Error number 2, date time, big old JSON blob. And it was multiple terabytes for just a couple of months worth of error logs. You just don't need to store that in a relational database because backups and restores suck so much amongst so many other things. Next up, Jim Van Allen. Good to see you as well. We've been talking a bunch on Facebook, talking about cars as well. Jim's into Porsches, and I just got my first Ferrari. Woohoo! Surly Dev says, is this Cabo or Las Vegas? This is Las Vegas. This is the brand new studio over in Las Vegas. I still have to get the lighting right. It's got a whole lot of work to do around the lighting and the room setup, but getting close. That is not a bike helmet. That's actually a car helmet that I used for my Stig costume over at Sequel Bits a few years back, and I just still have it. And I thought, oh, why not? Why don't I go ahead and have that in there? Next up, let's see here. Greg asks, what are the best and worst KPIs for SQL Server DBAs that you've ever seen? For me, the best one is RPO and RTO. How much data will the business lose, and how long will they be down for in a worst case scenario? And it's not that the best DBAs don't lose data or don't go down. It's that the best DBAs know what their RPO and RTO are, can meet it, and can express to the business if you wanted better, if you wanted a better RPO and RTO, or if you wanted to save money, here's what I can do to change that for you. I know you were correct. Very good, Surly Dev. I snuck those in down there as well. I'm going to try and use those more often. I have the green screen bodysuit too in the closet behind me. It's not that database administrators aren't allowed to lose data. It's just that they need to be on a crystal clear page with management, being on exactly the same page with management about here's how much data we're going to lose and here's how long we're going to be down for. Weird. For some reason, the chat just kind of stuck itself there. Let's see if I can refresh that chat. Properties. And oh, there's a button to refresh this. Oh, no, there it goes. Yeah, don't lose data. It's true, or they have security lockdowns too as well. Worst KPIs, help desk tickets, like how long your time to resolution is on help desk tickets, because the instant that you get that far deep in the weeds on firefighting, that all you're doing is managing help desk tickets, then I guarantee you're missing all of the bigger picture items. Things like, is my SQL Server patched? Is the cluster working appropriately? Do I know when I'm going to run out of hard drive space, and so forth. Next up, DBA Mufasa asks, hi Brent, do you have any connections in Microsoft? I have people who know who I am, and there are people who like me, but that first group is a whole lot bigger than that second group. How come we're in 2022 and we haven't come up with a baked-in option yet for restoring a table directly from backup? So this was one of the most highly requested items on Connect, Microsoft Connect. That was used to be their feedback system before they put a bullet in Connect, exactly, with a very small intersection. And then they started this new thing called feedback.azure.com, and it was one of the top voted ones on that before they put a bullet in that as well. I think they're trying to redo that somehow, but or they're trying to move to another feature for them. It's something that people clearly want. I think the answer to your question is it doesn't affect licensing sales. To some extent, Microsoft is focused on either increasing Azure spends or increasing licensing revenue. And because it's just not something that people consider when they're choosing databases or doing licensing revenue. And because there are tons of third-party products out there that do it. Quest Lightspeed does it, Idera SQL Safe does it, Redgate SQL Backup does it. That if it's something that's important to you, you can spend $1,000 and get it from a third party. I am not minimizing the request. I think it'd be a really cool request to have. We just don't have it yet because it is so easy to get through other methods. And I don't think that that people in Azure really feel that pain. Platform as a service, Azure SQL DB, managed instances, and hyperscale. I don't think that they see that as a big problem yet because it's the kind of environment where people want to go when they don't have production DBAs or don't want to hire production DBAs. And those people are just kind of set it and forget it. And those people don't have that ambitious of requirements. They're just kind of like, if we drop a table, we'll just restore the whole database somewhere else. Or they just assume we're never going to drop a whole table. That's usually what they think. Next up, Tolga asks, for SQL deadlock error resolution, when should be the problem resolved by the developer with client retry logic versus the DBA resolving versus rewriting the involved queries or stored procedures? When you say when should, I know a lot of DBAs have this stone tower mentality where they believe that they live up in a stone tower and everyone else should do their bidding. Look at those peasants down there. Those peasants aren't doing an appropriate retry logic. Why, those peasants should improve their application. When in reality, you're a database administrator. You're there to serve and protect. And don't forget that, it's like police officers. You're there to serve and protect, but part of that is to serve. And if you can rewrite the query or stored procedure quickly, why wouldn't you do that? Like, what's the fastest way to get resolution? And so if you find yourself in that stone tower mentality where you're going, look at those peasants, just remember that the company hired you for your expertise. Use that expertise. Go do it instead of complaining why other people don't do their jobs. Next up, Ann Young asks, does it ever make sense to put a clustered index on a temp table to avoid the high forwarded fetches reported by SP Blitz first? Now, the problem with that warning with SP Blitz first is that we're going based off of a perfmon counter, and we can't tell you which table it is. SQL Server doesn't track it. So it makes it hard to figure out which query is involved in it. When I get to the point when I'm tuning a specific query, all the time in my mastering query tuning classes, I use a little half-hour hourglass. And I say that when I pop open a query, I want to make the biggest bang for the buck that I can inside the span of that half an hour. So when you get to the point that you've identified a specific query that's triggering that warning and you go open up that query, just remember to focus on what's the biggest bang for the buck for tuning that query. The thing with high forwarded fetches is it's usually indicative that you have some other kind of design problem around the queries or the tables involved. Maybe it's the clustered key. Maybe it's something completely different. So just pop it open and spend 30 minutes diagnosing what you think the biggest problem is in that query. Have I ever put on clustered indexes on temp tables? Absolutely. Have I done it to fix the high forwarded fetches problem? Absolutely. I just always want to be careful when I give advice like that because so often people get absorbed in the rocket surgery details. They're like, you know what my real problem is? Spin locks. When in reality, they don't even have like sargeable where clauses. So that's why I say focus on the most important thing. Can I join you? Oh, that's good. It says, I feel whenever there's a problem in the app, people usually blame it on the DBA, default blame acceptor. It's greeting much more focus. I don't even know what you're saying there. I guess my question is how to get more recognition or showcase my worth when I improve things. Oh, okay, so there's really big picture. What did the company hire you for? Because it sounds like you're a database administrator. What did the company hire you for? So go to your manager and say, what's the biggest thing that you need to be able to do that you can't do today? One of the managers that I worked for example, said, I need to be able to cut costs in the IT department. I'm under pressure from my management. I got to figure out how I'm going to bring costs down. I just don't know how to do it. And I'm like, great. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to go make an inventory of all our SQL Server licensing. I'm going to look for the servers that are the most sitting around idle but are consuming so much resources, and I'm going to figure out how we're going to consolidate those down onto fewer servers. In another example, it was, I need to be able to ship products faster, and everybody's complaining that the database is too slow. So whoever your manager is, find out what their biggest pain point is. And if they hired you in order to make the queries go faster, number one, find the biggest bottleneck on the server. Number two, find the queries that are causing that problem. Number three, figure out what the problems are in those queries and fix them. Demonstrating to management, okay, I rewrote this query and I gave it to developers. I said, here's a new proof of concept version of this query. Instead of using 5 seconds worth of CPU, now it uses 200 milliseconds. Track that query going into development, getting out to production, and track the CPU change on the server. You need to be able to connect the dots that I spent this much time working and our resources on the server dropped by this much, indicating that this query is going faster and we can spend less on hardware overall. It sounds like you're going at it from, I'm improving things. Well, you might be focused on something that management doesn't really care about. You might be focused on a server they don't care about. You might be focused on queries that they don't care about. Or you might not be measuring your SQL Server in a way that shows how much you improved things. So hopefully that helps there. Next up, you're the man now, dog. I recognize that reference. That's good. Said, I started a nothing to do during COVID software as a service MIS app and found real world limitations with Microsoft SQL on premises and in Azure. So I just did some digging and I found really good advertising for other database flavors, but nothing really good for software as a service. Is it just me? I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by software as a service. I mean, I know really well what software as a service means, but what are the pains that you think you're facing would be the question that I would ask. I'm not really sure what you mean about what the limitations are. The more specific you can be. So let me rephrase it. I know a lot. I have a lot of clients who do software as a service. They all have pains. They all have different pains. Be more specific about what the specific pain you're facing. I can't find a database that does blank, and I might be able to take it from there. Next up, we'll grab a couple of the lower voted questions that just happened to come in during the thing. Hey Brent, as John Doe asks, hey Brent, as a tech guy and database guy, what are your thoughts on cryptocurrencies? Give us some insights if you have any. I kind of think of it as like foreign exchange, or like should you keep your money in British pounds or the euro? It's not something that I'm qualified to give advice on, and so I wouldn't want to influence people one way or another about what their investment strategy should be or anything like that. I can tell you that I have friends who got involved in cryptocurrencies and they made a freaking fortune. I mean, one of my friends does that and drives a Ferrari now. It ain't me, it drives a brand new Ferrari. But I think it, just like anything with investments, I'm just not the person who should be giving that advice. And I know a lot of tech people have really strong feelings about it, but just because you have strong feelings about something doesn't mean that you're actually educated on the concept or that you should give advice. I can't stand bananas. Jeb asks, now, how do you convince the developers of the importance of caching results from a slow stored procedure that returns static data as opposed to executing the proc hundreds of times per minute? The simple way that you do it is count up the CPU time that is consumed by that stored procedure per minute. So I'm going to give you a really simple example. Let's say you said that this query runs hundreds of times per minute. Let's say that the query, each time that it runs, every time that it runs, it goes parallel across 4 CPUs and it runs for 1 second. It consumes 4 seconds worth of CPU time. Now, as far as the developers are concerned, that's not a very big deal because the query runs in 1 second, but it's consuming 4 seconds of CPU each time that it runs. And let's say, just to keep the numbers simple, that it runs once a second. So every second, this thing runs once, it goes parallel across 4 cores, and it consumes 4 cores worth of CPU power. That means that it's keeping 4 CPUs busy full time all the time. That is a really effective way of communicating it to management. Hey, you know that 16 core server that we have? 4 cores of it are busy all the time running this query. If we could cache that, you're going to see CPU usage drop by 4 CPUs. Maybe it's 20% of our CPU usage or whatever it is. When I say it like that, then often people go back and they run the numbers and they go, oh, you know what? This thing only consumes maybe 100 milliseconds worth of CPU, and it runs twice a second. That's only 200 milliseconds worth of CPU. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. So sometimes the thing that you thought was really CPU intensive just isn't as bad as what we thought it was, especially when we say something that runs hundreds of times a minute. But if it is, consuming several CPU cores worth of power, then it becomes a really easy discussion to have with management. And then we'll do one more. We're going to do 2 because it's a terrible question. Aslan asks, what are the cons of hosting a large archival database on an external USB drive? So anytime that somebody trips over a cable, somebody's redoing an architect or infrastructure somewhere, they go to the wrong box and they unplug the wrong drive. Boom, you have database corruption if SQL Server was in the midst of trying to access that thing. So that just doesn't make sense at all. Anytime you're going to spend, remember SQL Server is $2,000 a CPU core for standard edition. It's $7,000 a core for enterprise edition. Don't go running, $100,000 worth of software on a laptop that you would buy 5 years ago. Make sure to use relevantly equivalent hardware for that. Okay, so we'll take one more. Sultan asks, is it okay to run SQL Server 2019 Standard Edition on a bare metal server with more than 24 cores? Any performance gotchas with this? We're trying to save money on licensing, even though we may have over-provisioned on hardware. Yes. So you can run into issues with memory access being slower than it should be. You can run into issues with NUMA node problems. You can run into issues with CPU scheduling. There are tons of issues that you can run into. If you have a box that's wider than 24 CPU cores and you're only running standard, remember, 24 physical cores of standard edition is $50,000. You spent $50,000 on licensing. You can buy a 24 CPU core server for way less than that. Don't lose perspective on what you're really spending here in terms of licensing. If you didn't license it and the licensing kind of fell off a truck, quote unquote, you want to go through and find out how much you actually did spend on that licensing. And the way that I'll approach it at companies is, because as a consultant, I'm not the licensing police. I don't, essentially care whether people licensed it or not. The way that I ask it is, Okay, right here you're running 24 cores worth of standard edition. That amounts to $50,000 US worth of licensing. I'm not going to ask to see your licensing, but would you like help reducing your licensing exposure? And then that immediately sets off warning bells because the people who didn't actually pay for it go, oh, yes, we would like help reducing our licensing exposure. And then in that case, when you got that big old wide host that you already bought, I'd be like, no problem, just run VMware or Hyper-V on it. Run VMware or Hyper-V and build a guest that is appropriately sized based on your licensing budget. I'm not saying that you already bought the software, maybe it just fell off a truck, but based on however much you actually intend to spend, let's go build a VM that's more right sized to that. And then that way, you won't run into the CPU scheduling problems, the NUMA access problems, and all of that. Plus, you'll be able to use the other CPU cycles for other stuff. Maybe it's SQL Server Developer Edition. Maybe it's Power BI. You know, who knows what your web servers, file servers, app servers, whatever it is that you're going to use it for. All right, there we go. We did a quick little office hour session. That was kind of neat. I like that. This seems to work out vaguely well. I definitely have some lighting work to do. It feels a little bit like a dungeon in here, and I'm going to try and get light strips underneath here to set off some of the collection type stuff that I have. And then next work on getting the lighting just right in the room for me too as well. Looking forward to having new light bulbs in this thing. This is an old ceiling fan, very grandma-ish. But the thing I love about it is it's dead silent. Like I can turn it on. Remember, I'm in Las Vegas in the desert here, and it gets like 110, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what that is for you Europeans. But it's silent. Like it's on right now and you can't hear anything to do with it, which is fantastic. Nanoleaf ones, I like those for background decoration, but if those are the ones that I think they are. I think the Nanoleaf ones are my Bluetooth keyboard died off. Nanoleaf is the ones that are big octagon or hexagon type things. Oh yeah, those are really pretty, but those are kind of expensive if you just want to light, underneath here. All I want to do is light inside the cabinet, so like just a cheap light switch kind of thing, or light LED strip kind of thing is all I'll end up doing. And then, of course, I'm going to do something on the back. I've got like paintings and stuff that I'm going to hang inside here, but I'm going to do it as a nice, hang them up on the wall. As an apartment and condo person for the longest time, I've always used 3M command strips. Man, those things are hot garbage. They don't hold onto the wall well, so I'm kind of excited to have the point where I have my own home where I can do anything that I want for hanging pictures and nails and drywall anchors and all those kinds of things. Although it also means that now I got to get committed to a particular layout for my photos and paintings, and that might make things a little tricky. All right, so thanks for hanging out with me this morning, and I will see y'all next time on Office Hours. Adios, y'all.